Hi, Ken from K&S Brakes. We have another C8 to do brakes on. This is another car that's getting tracked pretty heavily at VIR and Summit Point. And you can see the owner has done a few track days already. He's already having some pretty good front brake pad and rotor wear. You can see pretty good pad smear. A little heat checking on the rotors doesn't look too bad, but there's some wear there. More importantly, the kind of the smear you see of the pad around on the disc. That can clearly lead to some good pedal vibration under braking. He's gone through a couple of sets of pads, and what he decided to do was skip this and go right to the AP Racing big brake kit that was recently released by Essex Racing. We do have that kit here for install, and first thing of course we need to do is get the other parts off the car, and so we'll go over some of that stuff. We had a previous video when we looked at the car the first time, saw kind of some of the weird fasteners. So now we have a good socket to get the cross bolt out, and these torque screws aren't a big problem. And these pads have already been removed, obviously, so they'll slide out the top very easily like a normal brake job. So we'll go ahead and do that. There's some talk that this is either a T40 or a T40 Plus. We've actually, this looks like it's the second pair of these, but we just make sure we're in there snug and get those broken loose. So as you can see in these pins, there is some thread lock on the threads, and after a few installs, you probably want to have something. I'm trying to figure out, we don't want to use a permanent Loctite because that's going to pull the threads out of the aluminum, but we probably want to come up with something at some point that's all off of there, and you want to have, you can see it hardens and gets out of there. So we'll figure something out for that. These Carbotechs had about 5 track days on them.
It's not bad, you know, most of it was at Summit, and I didn't think it was going to make it through VIR. VIR was, I think, definitely easier on the brakes than Summit Point. The OEM pads lasted 2 days at VIR.
Yeah, they'll work, but they don't last long.
Yeah, they were good.
So these are pretty much done. There's a little bit of room there before the rivets, but not much. You maybe had another day on
So
these.
most of the groups use, they use the backing plate as a guide.
Yeah, you can see it's almost the same.
And if it's less than the backing plate, they don't.
You're out, yeah. All right, we got the front rotors from the big brake kit here in front of us, as well as the OEM Z51 rotors. They are both curved vane discs, as you can tell. This is a little bit thicker and certainly lighter. The OEM disc is about 24 pounds or so. And the 2-piece rotor from AP Racing, a nice tidy 22. So you're going to save about a pound or so off the rotor. But you can see, I want to say this is a 72 or 84 vane disc. You know, that's a good fan there to move some air. So we'll start to put the kit together and get the parts on the car. Off we go. Can't be that way, anyways. This way, right? Okay, so we're gonna start putting the kit on the car. We're gonna do it a little differently than Essex says, just for some convenience. We'll leave the OEM caliper attached with the brake line intact. We like to make that switch all at once at the end to reduce the amount of fluid that's trying to drip or come out of the car. So we'll just leave that there for now. They do suggest using some red Loctite on these bolts. So as they say in the instructions, I would consider be very sparing with it because the red Loctite is strong. Pretty snug right away. I'm not sure why, but That's a 22 millimeter. Must be a little burn there, so we'll use caution with that. And the torque spec on these bolts is, according to the manual, how much?
104.
Say it out loud.
104.
104 foot-pounds. Next thing to go on should, I'm assumedly, be the brake rotor. They are definitely left and right. The vanes angle backwards on the top. And in this case, they don't use the set screw, so that whole situation is no longer a thing. Make sure your hub surface is free of any real rust or scale. These cars don't tend to see a lot of rain, so it should be all right there. Come on. There you go. So that's something useful to hold the rotor on while you're putting the caliper on. Oopsie. These are self-locking jet nuts. These, I assume these do not require Loctite because you can see they're not quite round. So the caliper is roughly the same size as the OEM caliper. It looks a little more robust. It's got the good cross bridge here. And you can see the piston bores are sort of, you know, a lot of airflow can get down here for cooling. There's a nice bridge on the back here. Those are castellated pistons, so you have less contact points to the brake pad. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there to help the calipers work better. You see the steel abutment plate, that's where the pad sits down in it. And then of course the leading piston is always the smallest. That's just how it works best to get the uniform wear on the brake pads. So this should slide right down on the, ooh, we got some washers here first. Glad we got those. That fits great. All right. So we need to make sure these washers go on the outside. I make sure I know they do, but let's look at the manual. I know there's not a spacer, but can you see that? Let me check that in the manual for me. So the jet nuts create resistance once they grab. You want to just get them snug first. All right, and these are supposed to torque to 40 foot-pounds. There you go. And there you have it. Short of getting the brake line attached, we're almost done. I guess we'll go ahead and put the pads in now. So the caliper comes with these spacers, but we're going to use the tension clips. I think they should actually include the tension clips because every time I sold the kit without the tension clips, they soon call up and buy them because apparently the pads rattle around pretty good without them in there. So we'll take these bolts out, take these spacers out, and get the pads and tension clips in the caliper, and then we'll get on to the brake lines. He's going to use the Ferodo DS3.12 compound. is pretty aggressive. He's on street tires, so he's gonna have a lot of fun. It'll definitely be some getting used to, most likely. Looks like a little bit of red Loctite in there, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. Just make sure they're in there snug. These pads should drop right in like a glove. That's what you hear if you don't have the clips holding them from rattling. So these are obviously pretty much doing the same thing, except you can see where this will push down on the pad a little bit. So, oh yeah, there you go. First time I've done it, and that takes a little bit of effort. There you go. Not too bad. The spec for these bolts is 11 foot-pounds. That's very light, almost too light for this wrench. But it's got a 10 on there, so we'll go with it. Yeah, that's all. I think the wrench is heavier than 10 pounds. There's nothing fancy, but you know, 2 crush washers and the banjo. So we'll put that in the caliper first. So I just thread that in, and I'm not going to tighten it all the way. I'm just going to have it ready to go. So we're going to get this bracket off, crack the hardline connection, and then disconnect everything and reconnect this all at once. That way, like I said, we lose as little fluid as possible, and that makes it a little bit cleaner and easier. Once it's loose, you can get a little more play there. And the bolt feels like it's about 3 times longer than it needs to be, but that's what they put on there. There it goes. I'm going to probably reuse that. Usually, we want to crack this first, because this is now held firmly, so before we disconnect it, let's try to crack the line. Sometimes they're tighter. The infamous C6 lines that would always strip, so we'll see. All right, good. So we know that'll now come off pretty easy. Well, yeah, exactly. At the cost of SRF and the difficulty in obtaining it at this point, I don't want to pry on that too much, but I don't want to get this. You can just get, there we go. It's got a catchy edge there. It's usually. There we go. All right, so at this point we're ready to do a quick connect, reconnect. So this is here, ready to go. We'll put the bracket in later. So we'll disconnect the line, push it through, and caliper on, and we put the brake lines on. The routing is a little tight, so we definitely fiddled with it, rotating the end fittings a bit. Looks like they want the banjo to point up, and then this is at full lock left. And this, you definitely need to angle that to keep the line away from the strut. So we show it, you know, check it carefully. There's a full left turn, and let's move it back to full right, and you can see it wants to get close to a lot of stuff. And there you go. So that should be good. It shouldn't be into the wheel, but you definitely want to keep your eye on that and check that. looks like there's just needs a lot of room there, a little tight of a fit. So be careful with that. The only time we ever see lines fail is when they rub, and that of course is no good. So this side is all together. It took a little longer than we thought, but we were going slow. And now we'll proceed to the other side and move along. All right, so we have the install finished. No real surprises. Just a couple of things. We had to hook the battery back up when the calipers were off to get in the car to get the parking brake disengaged. And of course, the car, I guess, knew there was no fluid in the front or something, so it's flashing lights. Hopefully that will reset itself when we restart the car. Bleeding and flushing, no real issue there, just normal stuff. We showed some of that in the video before. We just use a manual method, gravity, etc. And then, so in this case, we're running the DS3.12 Ferodo pads in the front of the car. And then in the rear of the car, we installed the Girodis 2-piece rotors. And back here, we don't have Ferodos available yet, so he's running the Rebestos ST43s. So we'll see. It's definitely going to change the way the car brakes for sure. I'll be at the IR tomorrow. Hopefully it's for the good. Everything, like I said, went off without a hitch. Just be careful with the calipers off. I think the car, when you get some power to it, it may try to move a piston around, so watch that. But other than that, you know, make sure your parking brake's off, etc., because it needs to wiggle like that if you want to be able to get the rotor off. Other than that, I think we're good to go. So we'll do some bedding. And just for a moment about that, now, the brakes are big and take a minute to heat up. You want to drive around and do some regular braking to get some material on the rotor surface before you really try to do a good pad bed in. Some street driving, regular braking, whatever you can do. And then when you do bed the pads, you know, warm them up a bit first in advance. We've had a couple of guys try to put all this on the car and go to the track, and they were, you know, the pads got hot too quick. There wasn't enough material on the rotor. It just smeared and kind of made a mess. So, you know, leave yourself some time to take care of that before you get the car on the track. And of course, there are pre-burnishing pad and rotor options from Essex that you can purchase with your kit to make that go a little smoother. So we'll do some driving, and hopefully the customer will have a great time at VIR this weekend. Thank you. For Christmas, I'm going to upgrade my torque wrench. I want one that beeps. Tell you the torque spec on this is, do we have one? Anybody? Let's check the manual. Nice, Sophie, any fun?